has just begun. Night of the Demons. Rated R.
Welcome to the Cinematic Void Podcast. Cinematic Void is a cult film series that hosts screenings in the Los Angeles area as well as online virtually. I'm your host, Jim Branscombe, and join me as always is...
Hey, what's up? It's Nick Vance, Paranoid Futures on all these social media platforms. You can find Cinematic Void on the World Wide Web at cinematicvoid.com, as well as on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and now also Amazon Podcasts.
Yeah, boy. And if you want to support Cinematic Void, consider joining our Patreon. Not only do you get cool perks, but you make this podcast as well as the Cinemadness movie possible. We are continuing with part 2 of our 4-part series entitled On Halloween, where we're going to be talking and discussing and dissecting movies that take place on everyone's favorite holiday, which is Halloween. Last time we talked about the Halloween franchise and then some adjacent slashers that have pumpkins and kind of rhymed, you know, Jacko, Hacko, Wacko, and what was the other one we talked about? Trick or Treat. So it's Tricker, Hacko, Wacko, and Jacko. We're going to continue talking about movies that take place on Halloween, and this next set has to do with witchcraft and demons and that kind of stuff, so hey, let's just fucking jump into this right here. So this first movie we're going to talk about today, it's from 1988. It was the follow-up to the director Kevin Tenay's Witchboard, which starred Tawny Kitaen, who you might remember from the Whitesnake video where she's crawling around. Kevin Tenay made Witchboard. This was his follow-up to it. And he also made another movie after this called Witch Trap, which had to famously include a title card that stated that the film was not a sequel to Witchboard, which we'll get into at some point, at some other episode, not today. The film stars Amelia Kincaid as Angela, Linnea Quigley, Hal Havens, Allison Barron, and Alvin Alexis. We could only be talking about one of the great horror demon movies from the 80s, which is Night of the Demons. The effects in this movie are really great. They were done by Steve Johnson, who also worked on Ghostbusters, Big Trouble in Little China, and the Alex Winter vehicle Freaked. The movie's fast-paced, it's funny, it's gory, it's scary. It's essentially everything you want out of a horror movie. And it does a real good job of capturing, you know, the main focus of this episode is it captures the spirit of Halloween on film.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of great lines in this movie. There's a scene where there's two characters fucking in a coffin, and one of them says, "This is worse than my father's V-dub." Every time I see a Volkswagen car or hear any mention of it, see a commercial, I think V-dub. And like I would never say that out. I mean, except for this very situation, I would never say it out loud. But it always fucking crosses my mind, and it just bums me out.
You know, there's really good like one-liners and zingers throughout, and you know, just to mention, it has the second best use of a Bauhaus song after The Hunger, which is Angela's dance sequence to Stigmata Martyr.
Oh yeah.
And you know, when I think about this movie, like there's a lot of ways you can like pair it up for double features and that kind of thing. Like obviously you'd probably play with Witchboard or Witch Trap, which is not a sequel to Witchboard, as according to that title card. I think it actually make a really good double bill with Lamberto Bava's Demons, because plot-wise they're kind of similar, although like they're kind of stuck at a funeral home for Night of the Demons, and Demons are all stuck in a movie theater. But I think it's a good double. One thing I do want to mention is there's a lot of punk stuff in this movie as well, which should cater to our like taste in like, you know, because like there's not a lot of movies you can watch where like there's authentic punk shit in it.
I remember there being a bunch of stickers on the boombox, and maybe some like there's definitely like a cheesy 80s like musical vibe kind of throughout the movie. I don't remember there being a bunch of just straight up like even fake punk music. But I do remember just those stickers in particular, and the Bauhaus song, as you had mentioned. Definitely say it's a punk horror movie, and it's in that, you know, in that realm of things, like Return of the Living Dead.
Return of the Living Dead, and that kind of stuff.
It's definitely in that realm, and Return of the Living Dead, and also Happy Hell Night. Ooh. Believe it or not, which we'll talk about later, and why that's kind of a punk movie in a way.
In a weird way, but in a way. I really like this movie. I feel like it's it is a quintessential like Halloween favorite, and you know the costume. Like, there's also the other thread line in it, which like I know you kind of like we were talking about before the podcast, which is Julie's dressed as Alice from Alice in Wonderland.
Can it really be a Halloween movie if there isn't a character dressed as Alice in Wonderland?
That's true.
At least as far as Halloween horror movies go.
Now, I know I previously already said that Lamberto Bava's Demons would make a really good double feature with Night of the Demons. But this next film we're going to talk about would actually make a really damn good double feature too. It's from 1986, so it came out 2 years before Night of the Demons. It's probably best known because it had two rock gods in it. One being Ozzy Osbourne from his solo career and, of course, Black Sabbath. The other being Gene Simmons from Kiss and a reality show, whatever Gene Simmons did on the reality show. I guess it was about his family. I don't know. I never fucking saw it. This is a movie that I think is a lot of fun. It's a heavy metal horror, so if you like, we talked about Hack-O-Lantern last time. And, I've shown stuff on the Cinematis movie, like I showed Rock and Roll Nightmare with Thor as well as Black Roses. I'm talking about Trick or Treat, not to be confused with Trick or Treats, which we talked about on the last episode with Peter Jason and Carrie Snodgrass and David Carradine. Not to be confused with Trick or Treat, which is the Mike Doherty anthology film we're going to talk about on another episode. This is the heavy metal horror Trick or Treat. And the movie's also known as Ragman, and it's about a teenager who's devastated by the death of his heavy metal idol, Sammy Kerr. But as Halloween night approaches, he discovers that he may be the only one who can stop Sammy from making a satanic comeback from beyond the grave. And, I already mentioned the two big heavy hitters of heavy metal that are in this movie. Gene Simmons plays a radio DJ named Nuke, who Gene was kind of basing it on like Wolfman Jack. Ozzy Osbourne, who obviously was taking the piss out of the religious right at the time for protesting his music, plays a anti-heavy metal preacher. Kind of fun, kind of ironic. You've seen Trick or Treat, right?
Not really.
It's all right.
No, not really.
The thing about this movie, it's in a weird limbo and it's mostly, I think, because of the soundtrack reasons. Like, it was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who's a big producer, but like for some reason it came out on DVD on one of I think Platinum or one of those like gray area labels, and then I think at one point Anchor Bay was supposed to put it out, and it just never came out because of the music licensing shit. So it's kind of hard to see. It's on YouTube. If you haven't seen, go check it out. I wish there was a better version. Actually, there's a pretty good German media book Blu-ray that you can pick up. That's probably the best it's going to look, but if you haven't checked it out and you want to do it non-committal, it's on YouTube. Some quick facts about this movie. It was also supposed to have another heavy metal legend in it. Originally, Blackie Lawless from the band Wasp had auditioned and wanted the role as Sammy Kerr. And he was all for it. He's like, hey, Wasp will do the soundtrack. It'll be cool. But the production had already decided they wanted to use this band called Fastway on the soundtrack. So if Blackie had taken the role of Sammy Kerr, he would have been lip-syncing all these Fastway songs. And Blackie said, fuck that. I have my own band. I don't need to do this shit. Or something like that. It could have been amicable or whatever. But
you might remember Blackie as the guy just pounding Jack Daniels in a pool in Decline 2.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So they did end up having Wasp on the soundtrack. But they had this band called Fastway, which is of note because it featured Fast Eddie Clarke, who was formerly of Motorhead. And the songs are actually pretty good. I mean, Trick or Treat came out amongst a trend of heavy metal horror. We already talked about Black Roses and Rock and Roll Nightmare, but there was also Rocktober Blood and Shock 'em Dead. So heavy metal, Satanic Panic was definitely on the pulse of people trying to cash in on the horror stuff. And for whatever reason, none of those movies, they're all big cult movies. Like, people love those movies, but none of them took off in a mainstream way. And I guess it's because, when they came out, people like Poison. But yeah, none of those movies, did great or whatever. I mean, they did respectable, but, none of them were, big crossover hits. Although it's played out more serious than some of the movies we already talked about, it does have a good bit of, there's a sheen of heavy metal cheese throughout of it. And that's just by nature of being, 1, a movie of the 80s, 2, a movie in the 80s about heavy metal, 3, a movie in the 80s about heavy metal that deals with, satanic possession. Like I said, this, like Hack-O-Lantern, it does lean into the whole satanic panic, PMRC outrage, and, brings up the biggest fear that all these, like, scared suburban mothers feared about their kids listening to rock and roll. Which is, if you played the record backwards, bad shit would happen. There'd be, like, satanic messages and stuff. And there's definitely a scene where, like, someone plays a record backwards, creatures start coming out of the speaker, everything that kept Tipper Gore up late at night. The movie does have a lot of really good effects, just like the last movie we talked about, Night of the Demons. These effects were done by Kevin Yeager, who went on to design the Crypt Keeper from HBO's Tales from the Crypt. He also worked on Chucky. He also became Robert Englund's personal effects makeup artist on a few of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. So it's got really good effects. And like I said, this movie's been in a weird limbo. Hasn't had a real release since the 2000s outside of that German media book Blu-ray that you can pick up. And like I said, if you really want to watch it, it's on YouTube. Just type in Trick or Treat. Not Trick or Treats. Not Trick or Treat. Trick or Treat. And you can enjoy some heavy metal horror for Halloween. Now, we're going to close things out here with a little bit of a curveball, I guess. I mean, there's witches and there's demonic stuff in all three of these movies. Except this one was a Disney production. And, it's got occult elements. It takes place on Halloween. And it also takes place in one of my favorite towns in the world, which is Salem, Massachusetts. It's based on a story by Mick Garris, who you probably best know for being the writer-director of Sleepwalkers. He also did the TV movie version of Stephen King's The Stand, as well as The Shining. And it's also written and produced by Child's Play co-creator David Kirshner. And the film was directed by Newsies' Kenny Ortega. Let's just keep going in case there's not enough clues here. It stars Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kathy Najimy, Thora Birch, Vanessa Shaw, Doug Jones, and Amari Katz. And of course, I'm talking about Hocus Pocus. Now, this seems like a film that we wouldn't bring up in Cinematic Void on the podcast or any form, but again, it takes place on Halloween, and like I said, it takes place in one of my favorite places, Salem, so hey, I think it's fair game, and I also think take out the Disney portion of all of that, I think it's not a bad movie, honestly.
Disney's been known to make some pretty good stuff from time to time, so.
Yeah, I mean, they made The Black Cauldron, which is one of my favorite movies I saw growing up, and, there's other things I like, but for those of you who haven't seen Hocus Pocus or have been avoiding it because it's a Disney movie, 300 years have passed since the Sanderson sisters, who were played by Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Kathy Najimy, were executed for practicing dark witchcraft. When a new kid in town who shows up, he's from Los Angeles, he moves to Salem, he does trying to fit in and stuff. He decides that he doesn't believe in all the Salem history and lights the cursed black candle on Halloween night on a full moon. And because he's a virgin, by doing that, it brings back the three Sanderson sister witches who look to enslave all the town's children so they can maintain their youth. Now, from my understanding about this movie, Mick and David's original idea was much, much darker and much more of a straight-ahead horror movie before it ended up being Disney-tized, obviously. Yeah. But, even so, there's still a lot of, dark edge throughout it. And, because this Disney movie has high production value, the sets and props were designed by William Sandell, who's one of my favorite guests I've ever had at Cinematic Void. Great dude. He also worked with Paul Verhoeven over the years. He did Total Recall and RoboCop with him. And I basically, one of her former co-workers, Alistair, was friends with him and introduced me to him because, he loves Halloween, he loves Hocus Pocus, and, he is great. I think he puts a lot of his props on display. There's the Sugarmint Gallery, which is in South Pasadena. It's actually right next to the Michael Myers house. And, they've done displays on Hocus Pocus stuff and used all of his props and stuff, including the book from the movie. So, the movie looks incredible. The effects are by Tony Gardner, who worked on, we already talked about a little bit earlier, Return of the Living Dead, and a bunch of other things. Tony's one of the great effects artists. And he did a really bang-up job on the zombie Billy Butcherson, played by Guillermo del Toro's second favorite actor after Ron Perlman, Doug Jones. I'll say, like, it's one of my wife's favorite movies, and originally my wife was going to come here and gush on it, and she's like, how many white girls do you need to talk about Hocus Pocus on a podcast at this point? But she gave me some notes to talk about, and, like, my wife loves this movie, and it was part of the reason why I ended up screening Hocus Pocus as part of Cinematic Void a couple years ago. And I did a series called New England Nightmares, which are horror movies that take place in New England. So anything that was Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. I think I skipped Vermont, though, because whatever. Vermont's nothing but cheese, but you get the point. So I actually screened it, and it might have been a little too high concept for my own good. I screened Hocus Pocus with Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem. A little perverse. But I thought Hocus Pocus would carry the night. But, like, I also was showing it in May, which was too far away for, like, Halloween for some people. And honestly, I was surprised when we submitted the screening to get, clear rights with Disney to screen it, that they would say yes. It's like, there's no way they're going to be like, yeah, you can show Hocus Pocus with an unrated Rob Zombie movie. It's cool. And not only did they give it the thumbs up, they let us use an archival 35mm print for the screening.
Sick.
When I did the screening, I actually got a pretty decent panel put together for this. I got David Kirshner, who's the writer-producer. Mick Garris came out. William Sandell came out. Tony Gardner came out, and composer John Debney. And when I was doing the Q&A, like, you can actually go listen to Mick Garris's podcast, the Postmortem with Mick Garris. He actually took the Q&A, and I think he did another, like, interview with David Kirshner after it kind of, like, filled the runtime. But you can go listen to that Q&A online. And, the overall feeling was, like, yeah, it's a Disney movie, but the whole reason why everyone worked on the movie is because they loved Halloween. And, it really shows in the movie. They kind of partially shot in Salem, and obviously a lot of it's sound stages and stuff like that. But, like, I think it's a good capture of, like, at least 90s nostalgia for Halloween. And I think it's good. I mean, obviously, you have to, if you're gonna have Bette Midler in a movie, you have to have a musical number for Bette Midler. So she does a Screaming Jay Hawkins cover of "I Put a Spell on You" in the middle of the movie. And they actually, funny enough, they shot that at the Salem Town Hall, which is still there. It's a big brick building in the middle of the town. That they had a big Halloween party at least set up there. I don't know if they were actually. They might have actually been in there. I can't remember, but. And, if you go to Salem, you can go see the house where Army Katz and Thora Birch's family lived. You can see the Salem Town Hall. You can see the house where Vanessa Shaw's character lives at. So if you go to Salem, you can actually do a pretty decent, like, Hocus Pocus, like, location tour. And you can also do a Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem while you're at it, too, because a lot of those locations are pretty close by. But, yeah, I mean, the big thing is, like, it's definitely also a product of its time. It's very 90s. Like, two of the bullies in the movie that pick on Army Katz are just the epitome of 90s stereotypes. You have, like, grunge guy, Jay, and then you have, like, this, like, white boy rapper named Ice that looks like kind of wants to be Vanilla Ice, kind of wearing, like, a fucking, like, Run DMC fedora. It's a product of its time. A couple quick facts here. Army Katz actually bombed his audition because he was sick, and the production originally offered Leonardo DiCaprio the role. Leo ended up turning it down because he decided he wanted to make What's Eating Gilbert Grape instead. Which, I guess Leo had enough horror credit at this point because I think he did Critters 3 right before that. So maybe he didn't need Hocus Pocus when you got Critters 3.
He's an actor.
He's an actor. And funny enough, I know Critters 2, Mick Garris had something to do with it. I think he might have something to do with Critters 3 as well. Kind of an actual real historical tie to Salem and Hocus Pocus. Actor Sarah Jessica Parker's 10th great-grandmother in the 17th century was accused of being a witch, and she actually found out on this show called Who Do You Think You Are? It's an ancestry show. So Salem witch trials ended in 1693, and the movie takes place in 1993, exactly 300 years later. So it took place on the 300th anniversary of the Salem witch trials. And in the movie, the big plot point is lighting that black candle on a full moon on Halloween. The last time that actually happened was in 1974. And you know when the next time it's going to happen? This year on Halloween, 2020. There's a full moon on Halloween. And guess what? Because we live in a country full of pricks, ain't celebrating fucking Halloween outside. Be celebrating from the comfort of your own home because we're still on quarantine. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we're going to talk about more movies that take place on everyone's favorite holiday, Halloween, on the Cinematic Void podcast.
Unbearable suspense that keeps you on the edge of an abyss of terror.
Take a cult film odyssey into Cinemadness with Cinematic Void. Based in Los Angeles, Cinematic Void is a film series that specializes in horror and exploitation films. Currently, we are hosting Cinematic Void Up All Night in the Cinemadness movie, a monthly virtual screening series, as well as the Cinematic Void podcast, where we dive deeper into the world of cult cinema. You can find Cinematic Void on the World Wide Web at cinematicvoid.com, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you like what we do, you can support Cinematic Void by joining our Patreon. Until next time, see you in the Void.
My Halloween pumpkin is finished. Now to light it. What candles have ruined my other creations?
Try the pumpkin light. It's around my neck, your mad doctorship.
The pumpkin light is perfect to light my Halloween pumpkin. I'll place it inside. You can make your Halloween pumpkin safe and scary with the pumpkin light. Oh!
Available at Genevieve's, Woolworth, Walbaum's, Walgreen, Millwhite's Foodtown, and
Your own
Lambston.
Halloween pumpkin can be a lot of fun for grown-ups.
Hey kids, isn't this fun?
But with a pumpkin cutter, children of all ages can easily design and carve their own Halloween pumpkins in complete safety. The pumpkin cutter is simple and safe to use. There are no sharp edges, yet it quickly cuts through all pumpkins smoothly. Any child can learn to use the pumpkin cutter the very first time. Make this Halloween extra special with the pumpkin cutter.
Available at Genevieve's, Woolworth, Toys R Us, King's, Dan Supreme, and Drug World.
Welcome back. We're talking about movies that take place on everyone's favorite holiday, Halloween, on the Cinematic Void podcast. This is episode 204. We were talking about some kind of occult, demon, witch movies in the first section, and now we're going to switch gears and kind of pick up some odds and ends, starting with what may be one of the few zombie movies that take place on Halloween. And this one's a motherfucking dandy, because there's a lot of backstory to it. It's written, directed, and starring the original ghoul from George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, Bill Heinzman, and the film is an unauthorized sequel to Night of the Living Dead, with Heinzman reprising his role as the lead zombie. And to tie the two films together even more, Vincent Stravinsky, who played the posse gunman at the end of Night of the Living Dead that shoots Ben, also reprises his role as Vince. And not a lot of people have seen this movie. I feel like I always champion it because, I feel like you should be aware of this movie because, there's lots of tons of shitty, versions of Night of the Living Dead where people went back, added footage, used their footage of Night of the Living Dead in their movie, yada, yada, yada. But no one had the fucking outright balls to do a sequel, completely unauthorized, reusing a lot of shit from Night of the Living Dead. And that's what this movie is. It's called The Flesh Eater, a.k.a. Revenge of the Living Zombies, a.k.a. Zombie Nosh. It's from 1988, and like I said, it's written, directed, starring Bill Heinzman. And needless to say, both Romero and Night of the Living Dead co-creator John Russo, who wrote the script with George Romero, were not too pleased about this film. And in fact, I'm pretty sure lawyers were called in, and it might have got a little ugly, but because Night of the Living Dead infamously fell into the public domain, there wasn't shit anyone could do about it. So here you go, Flesh Eater. So Flesh Eater was the second and final film directed by Bill Heinzman. Previously, he had helmed The Majorettes, which is based on a novel by, again, tying it back to Night of the Living Dead, co-creator John Russo. And besides being an actor, Heinzman was a cameraman, and he shot several of Romero's industrial films, including the newly restored Amusement Park movie that was rediscovered. Everyone's like, oh, it's a lost Romero film. No, it's just one of the industrial movies he did, along with his OJ documentary and countless Iron City beer commercials and things like that. And Heinzman was also the director of photography on George Romero's Crazies. So there's a big history here, and I think Heinzman actually appeared in some of the later Romero films. I think he has bit parts or cameos in Night Riders and things like that. Same with Vince, who we mentioned earlier. Vince plays the train porter in Martin, and there's a tight-knit Pittsburgh community, but because none of those people made any money off of Night of the Living Dead because it fell in the public domain, which meant any asshole that had access to a film print could basically sell it. And I think that's where a little bit of this came from, was that I think Heinzman wanted to make another movie. This was presented to him, and he's like, fuck it, what do I have to lose? Name recognition 20 years later. It's like, he probably felt a little left behind with Romero getting success with Dawn of the Dead and Creepshow and things like that. And he was just like, well, I'm still in Pittsburgh doing the same shit. I want some of that fucking Dawn of the Dead money. So, here you go, Flesh Eater.
Do you think he got any of that Dawn of the Dead money?
Fuck no, he didn't get any of that Dawn of the Dead money. For the plot of the movie, it's pretty straight ahead. A group of college students on an overnight hayride on Halloween are besieged by the army of undead. Like, more or less, there's a coffin that one of the guys that's running the hayride finds, digs up, and guess what? Bill Heinzman's lead ghoul's in it, pops out, rips the guy's throat out, starts making a bunch of other zombies to go attack people. There's a couple things that I've observed from watching this movie, and I love this movie because, like, it makes no sense that it exists, and I'm so happy for that. You know, as a fan of the Italian films that made plenty of unauthorized sequels to movies, like, you know, there's Shocking Dark that was released as Terminator 2. There's things like that. In fact, Fulci's Zombie was released as Zombie 2 as, like, you know, capitalized on Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which was released as Zombie in Europe. But this is, you know, this goes beyond it because it's like literally, I think the biggest comparison I make is on when John Turturro brought back the Jesus character from The Big Lebowski and actually got the Coen brothers to sign off on it so he could make a movie about Jesus, the pedophile bowler. So it's kind of like that, except Turturro had permission and Heinzman didn't really. But some other observations. One, do not stand by a fucking window in this movie, because repeatedly, anyone that's standing by a window gets grabbed by a zombie, like just breaking through, grabbing him, bear hugging him, dragging him out. You know, if it happened once, it'd be one thing, but it happens all the fucking time in this movie. The second takeaway is Bill Heinzman's zombie is quite handsy with the ladies in this film, especially if it involves nudity. And I'm paraphrasing this a bit, but on one of the featurettes that you can find on the old Shriek Show DVD Blu-ray, Heinzman says something along the lines like, yeah, those scenes were uncomfortable, but, like, someone had to do them. And that someone also happened to be the writer and director and star. So, you're essentially writer-director Heinzman is setting up creepy Heinzman the actor. And I'm not trying to say there was some, like, weird, like, bad shit going on. I'm sure everyone knew what they were getting into and people were paid and that kind of thing. But when you watch the movie, it is clearly fucking awkward what happens anytime Heinzman's is in a scene with, like, a nude woman in the movie. And this is the biggest example, if you haven't seen the movie. I'm not trying to imply there's any wrongdoing that went down in this movie. I'm sure everyone knew what they were getting into and they were paid and, like, everyone, you know, signed off on it. But because of just the awkwardness of these scenes, and you can feel it when you're watching it, it makes them extra sleazy. And the best example of this in this movie, there's a shower scene. There's this woman that's supposed to be in her late teens. It's clearly played by a 30-year-old woman. I think on the commentary feature they mentioned that she was a real-life stripper. You know, has this very long, gratuitous shower scene. She gets out, she puts a towel on. Bill Heinzman's zombie comes busting in. And, you know, first he grabs her and, like, kind of, you know, shakes her around, does zombie stuff. But then he throws her on the bed. And he's, like, biting her neck. And his hand starts on her side. And then, like, just moves up without, like, just slyly as possible and rests on her boob. Like he's copping a feel. Like, flat out in this movie. He's just like, what the fuck, dude? And then he stops, he pauses, and seems kind of unsure of himself. You know, zombies shouldn't seem unsure because they're brain dead. But, like, you can tell there's, like, a crisis of conscience going on. And then he rips the towel off, puts his hand on her hip, and, like, very awkwardly, it's like, I don't know, dude, that just doesn't seem right. And then bites down on this, like, woman's chest, like, completely nude. And there's a couple other scenes like that. And it's just like, you know, I'm, again, not trying to imply anything. It's just like, it's definitely awkward. It's definitely creepy. And, like, as much as Bill Heinzman's like, well, someone had to do it. It's like, you're the motherfucker who wrote it. You wrote it so you had to do it. That's not a fucking excuse. When he got money for the movie, there was probably some, like, obligatory. You have to have nudity. You have to have gore. Like, all the selling points. But the way it's presented on camera is just so fucking awkward. It's like a 13-year-old boy wrote a horror movie. It's like, oh yeah, I gotta have, like, boobies in it. Like, that's just the mentality feels like. And it's like, God damn it, Bill Heinzman. You're the original ghoul from Night of the Living Dead. You worked on a ton of shit. You worked on a documentary about OG. No, never mind that part. But, I mean, yeah, it's uncomfortable. I have to note it because, like, it's so heavy-handed when it happens in the movie. And it happens...
No pun intended.
Oh. Oh, fuck, man. To kind of move away from Bill Heinzman being a creep, I screened it a couple years ago. I think it was year 2 of Cinematic Void. I used a 35mm print that Harry Guerrero had of the movie. And I'll be honest, the movie fucking slayed with an audience. Because people just kind of tuned in. It's like, here's your premise. Unauthorized Night of the Living Dead sequel. With someone that is like, was in Night of the Living Dead. Makeup makes him look like he was in Night of the Living Dead still.
He looks the same as he did in Night of the Living Dead,
I mean,
20-some years later.
Yeah, I mean, there's just... It is completely blatant what's going on there. And watching with the audience, it's a fucking blast. Even the creepy parts, people like kind of cringe at, but then like all the other shit, it's just like, it's a lot of fun to watch with a crowd. And, you know, as much as I talk about Bill Heinzman's creepiness, it's a movie I think that I wish more people would see just because of how ridiculous that... It's one of those movies that shouldn't exist. And it does.
And we're glad.
And we're glad. Like, so much so that, like, I've been talking with, like, one of my friends about starting a Blu-ray label. And honestly, like, one of the things I wanted to put out was Flesh Eater on Blu-ray. Like, take some of the old, like, Shriek Show, like, Media Blasters featurettes, but, like, do a new commentary, that kind of stuff. Obviously, Bill Heinzman can't have any part of it because he's dead, but, like, I just feel like it's a movie that represents Cinematic Void in a way. Not the sketchy part of it, but, like, it's an exploitation movie. It's a film no one's really seen. It's weird. It shouldn't exist. It completely exists. And it's a crowd pleaser. I actually dug really deep and, like, was really wanted to do this, and then I found out a label that I'm, you know, friends with and do a lot of work with is probably going to pick it up. And if that label ends up picking up, it's going to be in good hands. All I ask for is just let me do the commentary, the new commentary. I mean, other things about this movie, it's like the zombie attacks are really good. They're really gory. You know, obviously I don't think these had a lot of money. They didn't have that Dawn of the Dead money to do effects, but, like, the effects are really good. There's a Halloween party scene in a barn, and, like, there's a guy dressed as a vampire, gets his fucking nose bit off, and, like, blood just shoots out of that. There's a scene where, like, Bill Heinzman punches a half-naked girl in the gut and then pulls her heart out through her stomach. I don't know how anatomy works that way, but... I mean, there's some good effects in it, and I really like the score. Even though the score is pretty much like a riff on John Carpenter's Halloween theme. It's kind of like off-key, out of tune. But, like, it's a score that'll get stuck in your head if you watch the movie, because they play it enough. And I guess lastly, there's a couple... One of the best creepy scenes in the movie. There's a little girl dressed as an angel that answers the door, thinking it's trick-or-treater, and it's Bill Heinzman. And Heinzman grabs this little girl, is like, wow, cool costume kind of thing, and, like, grabs her and, like, rips her throat out. It was actually Bill Heinzman's daughter that played that little girl, which is why I guess he was comfortable doing that.
I thought that was a weird choice. You just don't see a lot of, like, straight up little kids being murdered in horror films like that.
I mean, there's almost 2 back-to-back in the same scene, because, like, her brother, who's dressed like a hobo, gets it too. And then whoever plays their mom, and then there's the sister that's supposed to be like a late teens girl that's obviously a 30-year-old stripper, but whatever. I mean, yeah, if you want to check it out, you can probably still pick up the old, like, Shriek Show Media Blasters Blu-ray or on DVD. It's also on YouTube if you want to go down that route. I mean, if you want to see an unauthorized sequel to one of the greatest horror movies ever made, starring essentially one of the big stars from that movie, Flesh Eater, check it out. Now, moving on, this next movie, we're moving from zombies to... It kind of fits in. It has to do with contagions and plagues and that kind of stuff. You know, the things that make zombies. It's also from 1988, and I actually talked about this on the last episode during a rewatch listen. It's a Italian-U.S. co-production. This movie's absolutely fucking bonkers. It's, I still fucking blown away. It's just like, holy shit, I can't believe, like, half the things I saw in this movie happen. It's directed by Vittorio Rambaldi, who's the son of special effects legend Carlo Rambaldi, who also did the effects on this movie. It's co-written by Umberto Lenzi, who did, Nightmare City, Cannibal Ferox, Orgasmo, Knife of Ice, Spasmo, like...
So it's gonna be fucking crazy.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be fucking nuts. And the movie is fucking bonkers. I'm talking about Primal Rage. And the film was made during this weird period where Italian film productions flooded Florida. Like, there was so many fucking Italian productions in Florida. You had things like Umberto Lenzi's Hitcher in the Dark, Sergio Martino's American Rickshaw. There's also the Berserk Nightmare Beach that Lenzi had a hand in. Didn't direct. He's always been incorrectly credited as director, but...
Why did that happen? It was just a cheap place to film, like, tropical kind of scenes? Or what's the deal with that?
I don't know, because there was a period where, like, Italian productions would come and pick almost weird places. Like, if you think of Troll 2 was shot in, like, Utah. But, like, I don't know why. I'm sure there's some kind of deal, but they, like, basically sent an Italian crew out to, like, a random U.S. location. And there's obviously a language barrier and that kind of stuff. And, like, a lot of those movies just ended up being absolute fucking bonkers. The way the Italians viewed the U.S., and then there's people that they were hiring who weren't necessarily real actors. So it just kind of added to the insanity. And it's not just, like, the same place in Florida. Like, some of it's in Jacksonville. Some of it's in fucking Miami. And, like, it was all over. Like, I don't know why. So, here's the gist of this movie. A scientist at a Florida university played by Bo Svensson, who is, probably best known for being Enzo Castellari's original Inglourious Bastards. And he's also the cop in one of my favorite exploitation movies ever made, Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, aka Night Morning. He inadvertently creates a rage virus. So it's kind of like very Cronenbergian, like body horror going on there. He basically creates it by performing experiments on, baboons and dead brain tissue. So there's a journalist that works for the college paper that breaks in to get an expose on like what this scientist is doing at this, Florida University lab, and he gets like bitten by one of these infected baboons, and then all of a sudden he's infected, and then he's infecting a lot of other people. So, like I said, I already mentioned Cronenberg. There's definitely shades of The Fly in there. There's a little bit of The Thing. There's definitely a lot of body horror in there because it's transformations and things like that. And because of the nature of, like, being simian, there's a little bit of Night of the Bloody Apes. Although I don't think anyone involved probably actually saw Night of the Bloody Apes. It's just something that came to mind. Where this movie really shines to me, because you just watched it recently too, didn't you?
Yes.
Where it really shines for me is the Halloween party scene. Which, when you watch this movie, it's clearly Florida. Nothing feels like fall at all. But they have a really, really extended Halloween sequence. And there's like these 3 would-be jock rapists that get scratched up and get infected. And like there's a scene where they're like lifting weights like, bro, you ready for fucking Halloween? And like just like fucking slamming beer. And they're completely within this rage virus. They put on these like crazy Grim Reaper costumes, like full like hoods and like skeleton masks. The eyes and the skeletons have these blinking red lights, and it's really, really fucking creepy.
They drive around in a convertible Ford Mustang. They got white. I think it was white, and they're in this fucking suit, right?
Yeah.
So cool. So sick.
They're like, they might as well just yell "Woo! Spring Break" when they're like driving around it. Like before they get in this car, they rip a fucking door off of someone else's car. Like it's insanity.
It's like the Karate Kid where they're in those fucking for Halloween. They're in those skeleton outfits. Like it's like that, but with full face, fucking full on. It's sick.
And basically on steroids.
On steroids for sure.
So these fucking like dudes show up to this like massive like Halloween party at this college, and I should mention, everyone at this fucking party has an amazing costume, which I think has to do with Carlo Rambaldi, the effects guy. Like, oh, it's not going to be like you look like you shopped at a Spirit Halloween last minute or went to fucking Walmart and just threw something together. Like, everyone has these baller-ass costumes. And granted, some of them play into, like, the deaths that come during this.
This is what the Italians think Americans do for Halloween.
I mean, I kind of wish this is what Americans did for Halloween on the regular. Because a lot of it's just, like, cheap, sexy fucking Pikachu or some shit. But, like, these are really elaborate, like, well-thought-out costumes. And again, they play into a lot of the death scenes, but whatever. But back to this crazy Halloween party. So, these dudes are just, like, fucking people up. There's one costume where this guy has multiple, like, tea kettles for a face. And then you, like, slam him against the wall, and there's blood shooting out of the nose of the tea kettle. And and it's, like, spraying on the skull mask. It's really, really effective. It's really, really creepy. There's a bunch of other stuff like that. And to add to the ridiculousness of it all, it is set to this obnoxious fucking pop song called Say the Word! That feels like a jingle from TJ Maxx or something.
Turn on the heat, let's lose control. Say the word, I'll be there. The lessons I learned, I don't really care. Say the word, take me high. As long as you're here in my arms, I could die.
And the song's like 8 minutes long because during the whole fucking like slaughter scene during this Halloween party.
Is this the only song in the movie?
No, there's other songs.
It just feels like it plays over and over and over.
I mean, surprisingly enough, the actual soundtrack to the movie is by Claudio Simonetti, who's best known for being in Goblin. And truthfully, I feel like, I don't want to say he phoned it in, but he definitely recycled some of his more famous themes for this one. There's definitely a song that is very, very, very reminiscent of the, like, one of the cues from Dawn of the Dead that he did.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't think Simonetti had a lot to do with Say the Word.
He had nothing to do with Say the Word. But interesting enough, the other songs that appear in the movie, there's a song by Steel Grave, who's a power metal band, and it's the exact same song that's used in Dario Argento's opera. I don't know if that's because Simonetti was friends with the band. They're like, hey, we need a heavy song for this movie. You don't want to play Say the Word again? No, we need something heavier. So they got the Steel Grave song, and it's exactly the same fucking song they use in opera that Argento uses for every time, like, there's a murder. And it's in this movie. It's during the scene where, like, when the three, like, would-be rapists try to go after this girl that's already infected, and she just scratches and bites the shit out of them and infects them. Like, that Steel Grave song's on the soundtrack. I mean, this movie's just fucking ridiculous. And, like, I really, really, really want to be able to show this in front of an audience, because I think it's gonna kill. It takes place on Halloween. It's fucking Florida trashy exploitation movie. There's some cool effects. There's a really fucking terrible song that you will hear over and over again. They'll get stuck in your head. So when you get Nick and I to compile your power pop horror like compilation, the song won't be on there. Actually, it might be.
It'll be on the R&B one.
It'll be on R&B one. Is that song even R&B? What the fuck genre?
I don't know. We're going to put that one on the same one that the Deep Red Rap goes on.
Ooh, there we go. That sounds fitting. For this next set on Halloween film, we're staying at the frat house with 1992's Happy Hell Night, aka Frat Fright. For the plot, for those of you who need it, 25 years ago at Winfield College, a psycho priest named Zachary Malice murdered 7 frat boys and was put away in a local asylum. Now, however, the same fraternity stages a prank for which Malice is inadvertently set free and returns to the house to repeat his crimes. Pretty simple setup. The movie stars Darren McGavin, best known as Kojak the Night Stalker, as well as being the dad in A Christmas Story. It also features early in their career appearances by Sam Rockwell and Georgia Fox.
Yeah, Sam Rockwell, he plays the younger version of Darren McGavin's character. So this movie is taking place 25 years after this incident happened. And if you remember Darren McGavin, 10 years earlier, he was the dad in A Christmas Story, Bob Clark's second best Christmas film, if I may.
Wow, true.
But yeah, man, 25 years later, Sam Rockwell, you're looking a little rough, man. No offense to Darren McGavin. Timeline there just doesn't add up, man.
I mean, there's a lot of things that don't add up in this movie, but for a Halloween set slasher, it's actually really, really quite mean-spirited. And the character of Malice, who's the killer priest, is actually really fucking scary. Like, he's got blacked out eyes. He looks like a demon.
He looks like Nosferatu.
He does. And so much so, when he's, like, busting out those jokey, supposed to be Freddy Krueger-esque quips.
No.
Where he, like, kills people. Like, oh, what were you saying?
He says no.
He has,
So he says no, and then something pertaining to, like, whatever the fuck's going on with you.
It's like, no diet, or something like that.
Yeah, like he would take your headband, your bandana, rip it off your head and choke you with it, and then say, no bandana.
Like, those, I think, are meant to be comical, but, like, it just plays into the creepiness of that.
No TV.
No TV.
No hand, or whatever. Like, I think he rips off multiple people's hands for some fucking reason.
It's a decent supernatural slasher. It's got some genuinely creepy parts and, you know, some good gory bits. There's also some really bizarre moments in it. Like, there's a bit where a Jesus statue comes to life, and it's just... It's all over the place. I don't want to say it's a great movie or a good movie, but it's an entertaining movie.
That it is. So for one, it came out in the fucking 90s. I thought it came out in the 80s. It has a very 80s feel, but then there's like one character that has like a grunge look. So there's that.
Someone had to be the asshole on the flannel with long hair. There's a theme song called Happy Hell Night, which is amazing and awful all at once. And, you know, it's by this band called Slush Puppies, who I'm not really familiar with, to be honest.
Is that the Happy Hell
Night
song that says happy? That actually the song describes the plot of the movie
Yeah,
throughout the song.
I'm surprised we didn't talk about this during Soundtrack Serenade. I probably because I forgot about it until we started working on this one. It's like, oh, I should have mentioned this one. Like, the song is like trying way too hard to be a Ramones song. Or maybe they're just trying to be Screeching Weasel or something along those lines.
25 years ago, Halloween, they dug him out of a mausoleum. Said some words from a book of golly. Happy Rose, you should have seen it. You can't run, you can't hide. You better watch out, or you're gonna die. Happy Hell Night, Happy Hell Night, Happy Hell Night, Happy Hell Night.
What was the band called that did the song?
Slush Puppies.
Slush Puppies. So Slush Puppy is one guy, or maybe, I mean, it probably is a band or whatever the fuck, but like, there's a main guy, and that main guy also wrote other songs for this movie. His name is, I think, Mark something, but like, it's definitely one of those things where he wrote a couple songs that sound like different bands. There was a band in this that played a song in this movie called Grinch, which may also be that dude. But so all the music in this movie, and this is early 90s, to me, it all sounds like LA, like Danger House punk. Like, there's a song that sounds like X. Like, it all sounds super LA. Like, you can't quite, I mean, aside from the Ramones song that you mentioned earlier, that's like super fucking Ramones. But it's all very like LA sounding. Alice Bag, X. Maybe these were real punk bands in the early 90s, but I have not heard of fucking Grinch. I looked it up, but it's not bad. It's kind of sick.
I mean, there's something about a movie that goes out of its way to create its own, like, soundtrack. I think of Heathers with, like, Teenage Suicide with that band.
Big Fun.
Yeah, Big Fun. It's kind of interesting that, like, you take influence and, like, you make your own, like, punk songs and you make them all based on different punk bands. Like, not a lot of people do that because people would just like play the same Black Flag song in a fucking movie.
Well, so speaking of Darren McGavin, Sam Rockwell, they happen to play a character named Henry Collins. That is not a fucking coincidence. That is not a mistake. Henry Collins. This is a punk movie, and one of your main characters is named Henry fucking Rollins.
Ooh. It's interesting. So he has to rise above and beat the killer priest.
Also worth mentioning, the director of this movie, he also didn't direct, but he wrote Brain Scan.
No shit.
Which is not a punk movie, but a cyberpunk movie.
Ah, there you go. And he did some other movies too, didn't he?
The guy that directed Brain Scan, whose name is
John Flynn.
he did a bunch of like Steven Seagal, either starring or type movies.
He also did Rolling Thunder, didn't he?
He did.
I don't think I could find a through line from like Rolling Thunder to like Happy Hell Night, but
No, but I definitely think that the guy that wrote it should have directed Brain Scan as well. Not saying it was a bad. I'm a Brain Scan defender, but I'm saying if the guy that wrote it also directed it, since he directed Happy Hell Night, I think it could have even been better.
ooh, that's a.
But they didn't give it to him. They didn't like Happy Hell Night enough to give him Brain Scan.
Did Happy Hell Night come out before Brain Scan,
It
or was it
did.
like...
I can't remember. I feel like Brain Scan was late-ish 90s, 96 or later.
Actually, Brain Scan came out in 1994, so 2 years after Happy Hell Night. Alright, so we got one more movie left in this section. We're gonna stay with, like, the religious theme. This movie is I would actually say it's a really, really well done, twisted slasher black comedy from the director of Squirm, Blue Sunshine, and Just Before Dawn. That's Jeff Lieberman. It stars Amanda Plummer, who's best known as Honey Bunny from Pulp Fiction, Catherine Winnick, who probably best known for playing Lagatha on the TV show Vikings, Alexander Bickel, who only did 2 movies, this and Todd Solondz' Palindrome, so hell of a career. I mean, if you knew Satan's Little Helper and Palindromes, you don't really need to make another movie. That's a good 1-2 punch. So I'm talking about 2004's Tribeca Film Festival selection, Satan's Little Helper, a film that has no business being as good as it actually is. And I'm not trying to be insulting by saying that, because it's a movie that was shot on HD cam, which, like, was never a great format. I mean, but really why it succeeds is a testament to writer-director Jeff Lieberman, who he hadn't made a feature-length film since 1988's Remote Control. So he's taken like this long hiatus, but honestly, Jeff Lieberman never really made a bad movie. Like, Squirm's great, Blue Sunshine I consider a fucking masterpiece, and Just Before Dawn is one of the great, like, hillbilly slashers ever made. And if you haven't seen Remote Control, it's pretty fun too. So it's, you know, I shouldn't have been like shocked that it was good, but like it's one of those things where it doesn't sound like it's going to be good. Because you look at the cover, it looks like your typical 2000s direct-to-video bullshit that like would flood a Hollywood video or Blockbuster, and everyone's like, "Oh, this might be good," or it just, you know, looks it looks like a fucking Full Moon movie on the cover. And I'm not trying to be disparaging, because, like, you know, Full Moon put out stuff like Tourist Trap and Laser Blast, but he also did Puppet Master, Doll Man, and tons of other things involving dolls and little monsters, and Killer Bongs and Ginger Dead Men and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, maybe this is my bias on those kind of movies. So I remember avoiding Satan's Little Helper for a long time, but then I actually saw it, and you know, it's fucking good. And actually, fucking good is, like, underselling it. I think it's fucking great. And for those of you who haven't seen it, during Halloween, a theater student named Jenna Woolley, played by Winnick, returns home to spend the holiday with her family with her boyfriend. Her younger brother, Dougie, who's obsessed with a video game called Satan's Little Helper, and, like, that's what he constantly plays on, like, a Game Gear or whatever the fucking thing is. I don't know what was big in the 2000s. Probably Game Gear. And he also does not like his sister's boyfriend because he's kind of attached to her. I'm not trying to imply some burial ground shit going down, but whatever. So he basically decides he's going to dress up as the main character from this video game, Satan's Little Helper, which is a little thing that helps Satan. And he goes out looking for Satan in hopes that Satan will kill his sister's boyfriend. Turns out he runs into a serial killer that is dressed like Satan. And because the kid is like singing the praises of Satan, the serial killer's like, fuck it, I'm just going to go along with it. And the little kid goes along with it. And the problem is the kid thinks like everyone that's dying is part of like the video game because he's so delusional. But really it's just like he's hanging out and like being accomplice to a murder what the serial killer's doing. So much so like he brings the serial killer home to meet his mom and sister. And his mom and sister think it's just like the sister's boyfriend dressed up trying to like bond with Dougie. The movie's really twisted, and like it again, there's no reason why like this should work, and it works fucking perfectly. There's like a real sadistic glee with this film, and Lieberman does a good job of balancing the humor and the horror. And you know, while some of the mayhem early on is kind of played for laughs, there's like a bit in a like supermarket like parking lot where like the Satan is like hitting people with a cart and that kind of shit. It's kind of played jokey, but then once it gets deadly serious, the tone completely shifts, and it's completely dark, and it's completely mean-spirited. And it's like, it's pretty impressive that like the movie works that way. I guess like first year of Cinematic Void, I ended up hosting a screening of this movie with Jeff Lieberman, who had just had the film remastered. He had his HD cam tapes remastered and like made a new DCP and all that, and it actually looked pretty fucking good. The downside of that screening, we were supposed to screen in the Little Theater at the Egyptian, which is the Spielberg, the 80-seater. And, you know, and we're getting ready to tech check, and the projectionist runs out. I was like, there's some green shit on the screen. Something's wrong. And like, okay. At first I thought maybe the DCP was bad or something like that. We had a Blu-ray backup or whatever. Turns out no matter what we played on the projector, it had these green blocks. And it turned out the projector was just fucking dying that night. So I had to turn and tell Jeff Lieberman's like, hey, here are our options. 1, we cancel the screening. 2, we wait for the screening that's in the big room to end so we can actually like screen it in there. And he's like, will anyone stay or whatever? Like, he was really worried because like it went from being a 7:30 like showtime to now being like the movie starts at 10 and the Q&A goes on at midnight. And I was like, you know, it's, if you want to do the screening tonight, this is going to be the only way it happens, because that projector's fucked. So I think Jeff went to the bar next door, had a few beers, and got in a good mood, and we screened the movie, and like most of the audience that showed up had not seen the movie, and people were like blown away and pleasantly surprised, because like they went in completely cold and got sucked into it. And you know, it's an interesting movie, and like I said, like, there's things about it where if you just think on the surface level, like turn-offs, like, you know, some people don't like shot-on-video movies. And, you know, HD cam was like a really new format at the time. And it doesn't look that great. But the movie works. Like, the performances are great. The gore is really good. And, you know, it's a fun movie to watch with the audience. And I know Jeff was really happy afterwards. And I was, like, really hoping that at some point Jeff would come back and we would either do like his Restoration Blue Sunshine or something like that. Hopefully maybe in the future we'll still do it. But like, you know, it was a really cool screening. We've talked a good bit about movies on Halloween, so we're going to take a little commercial break. And then when we return, we'll talk about some more things that have to do with the Halloween season on the Cinematic Void podcast.
Revenge of the Living Zombies. Just when you thought the dead were buried, they are back. Bill Heinzman, the ghoul from Night of the Living Dead, returns. Imagine your most horrifying nightmare has come to life. They look like people we know, people we love, but they will eat you alive. You cannot kill someone who is already dead. The most shocking horror film of all times. Revenge of the Living Zombies.
Welcome back. Before we move on this episode of On Halloween, there's a couple other movies that I want to mention but not go into great detail because we've already discussed them on other episodes of the podcast. And I'm just going to jump at it and talk about one of my favorites. It's from 1986. It's Neon Maniacs. And I've talked about it countlessly. I've shown it as a Cinematic Void show. I've shown it as a Cinemadness movie this past May. And I fucking love this movie. I screened it part of Beyond Fest with Street Trash, where they were both archival prints, and we showed it in the little room, which meant like we couldn't build up the reels, so we had to do 10 individual reel changes. So it was a long day, but like the really cool thing about showing Neon Maniacs was that this guy Sean Farana, who's now become a friend, really great guy. His dad was a producer on the movie. His dad also produced the trailer to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 Leatherface, the famous like Excalibur takeoff. So Sean actually showed up. We did a little Q&A, talking about his dad, talking about the production, and he had props from Neon Maniacs. He had like, I think he had the crossbow, he had one of the arms of one of the Neon Maniacs. It was really, really cool. And, you know, obviously what ties this movie into Halloween is the big, like, Halloween Battle of the Bands dance thing. Which just leads us to talk into another power pop classic that we've talked about before, and we'll probably talk about again outside of this podcast, which is Baby Lied. Which is... that song is fucking fire. I cannot stress how goddamn good that album is. Rick Bowles should have been fucking bigger than Rick Springfield at this point.
Should we mention the same sentence with Tom Petty?
Yeah. I mean, fuck it, man. Rick Bowles should have been playing fucking the Super Bowl playing Baby Lied.
Tom Petty did not write Baby Lied.
No. I mean, fucking
Neither did Elvis Costello, neither did anybody, man. Just Rick Bowles.
Rick Bowles wrote not only one of the greatest songs used on the soundtrack of a movie, but one of the greatest power pop anthems ever. And if you think we're just fucking around saying this shit, it's like, we talk about this song all the time. Like, just on the regular. Like literally. If you're doing your horror power pop compilation, let Nick and I fucking curate it. And front and center, first track, maybe put it, I mean, maybe we'll do what Europe used to do when they played live, where they played the final countdown as the first song and the last song. Maybe we'll put Baby Lied at the beginning of the record and then put it on the B side at the end of the record, because
if there's not a Baby Lied remix already.
I mean, we're talking more about Baby Lied than the Halloween tie-in, but like, hey, they play the song during a Halloween Battle of the Bands, and that's a fucking classic. Neon Maniacs, I still feel like it needs to be championed, but like more so Baby Lied.
It's a good movie, but it's a great song.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue that.
Just like the others, price that she makes you pay. Baby lied when she told me that I was the only one. Baby lied when she told me she'd never need someone new. Baby lied to me, she must have lied to you.
So how many maniacs are there?
There's many Neon Maniacs. So much so that, like, because of the way the production was on that movie, they sometimes change out, so multiple people would play different, like, the same Maniac, and then they would introduce new Maniacs and that kind of thing. Like, there might be, like, 12, 14 Maniacs in total.
10,000 maniacs.
God damn it, man. I can't believe I walked into that. Man. All right, I'm just going to slowly back away from that reference and go into the next little quick hit of another movie that I already talked about a little bit in length. It's from 1988, which seems to be, 86 and 88 seem to be the pocket years for like these made on Halloween movies outside of like the Carpenter segment of things. It is directed by Frank LaLoggia, who also made the high school Antichrist film Fear No Evil. Of course, I'm talking about Lady in White, that stars Lucas Haas. I talked about this on the Haunted House episode I did with my wife Morgan. It's one of my favorite ghost movies. It takes place on Halloween, but essentially is just the opening of the movie, and Lucas Haas's character is like locked at the school when he sees the ghost for the first time. That's all on Halloween. And I said this on the other podcast, but like watching that movie, even though it takes place in the 1950s kind of era, it just kind of reminds me of the like the 80s nostalgia I have for Halloween, like the classic, like wearing costumes, the decorations, the trick or treating, like the fall vibes, like, you know, Orange Leaf, Vertigo, as I quote the Misfits, which will come into play in a little bit here. But yeah, it's a really great movie. It's definitely more of a slow burner, artsy, kind of in the vein of like Stand By Me, since it's about a writer that's like retelling the story of his childhood kind of thing. Again, if you want to go more in depth about Lady in White, go check out the Haunted House Arrest episode on the Cinematic Void podcast. But like I I just have to mention because it is a Halloween movie. Normally we would end the episode with rewatch listen, but since we're doing all these episodes kind of like back to back to back, I figured it might be kind of fun to change things up, kind of seasonally. So for this episode, we're going to talk about, some of our favorite Halloween time music to listen to, and a couple concerts that you and I went to back in the day that were on Halloween. So I guess we'll start with the big thing. There's a bunch of fucking songs called Halloween. Misfits, Dead Kennedys, Susie and the Banshees, Sonic Youth, King Diamond, the hip hop group The Arsonists. All songs about Halloween, all really, really different in how they tackle it, and all of them really, really, really good. But the thing I think about is like there's certain albums and certain bands I feel more inclined to listen to in the Halloween season, if that makes sense. Do you feel that same way, Nick?
Yeah, man. I definitely have a few records like that. The Cure, Pornography is definitely a big one. I mean, that's one to maybe listen to all year round, but it's for sure a Halloween record.
My favorite's Wish, which is weird because it's essentially a pop record.
Oh, I'm with you, man. That's probably my second favorite, so that's sick. But yeah, Bauhaus, we mentioned earlier, definitely a big Halloween band, and all the Glenn Danzig stuff.
I mean, when you think of Halloween, you think of Glenn Danzig. Obviously, you're going to think about the Misfits.
Oh yeah.
And in fact, I think when I first met you, one of the first punk records you loaned me was the Misfits' Evil Live. And like, I remember when you loaned me that tape, I listened to that thing front to back over and over and over fucking again.
And was that because you were already a horror fan?
I think it was a combination of things. Because one, I was at that point in my life when I was looking for like a new musical avenue. Like I'd listened to some metal, listened to some hip hop, but like I hadn't really found a music that spoke to me. And the Misfits did because it covered a lot of things. It was fast, it was angry, and it talked about a subject that was near and dear to my heart, which was horror movies.
Eating brains.
Brains for dinner, brains for lunch. We talked about this a little bit before we start recording, but like, I don't really dig live records, but like there's something about Evil Live that just like, it's a fucking ripper. And, there's countless, like, even the dumb fucking in-between song things, like, we pound these motherfucking guitars like motherfucking jackhammers and shit.
You think you'll get out of the hospital in time?
And, like, Henry from Black Flag. I mean, I guess that's not really, like, something dumb. It's just introducing Henry Rollins from Black Flag, who sings old 138. Again, bringing the Cinematic Void podcast back to being the Black Flag podcast that we dream of.
Henry Collins of Black Flag.
Henry Collins of Happy Hell Night. I think the Misfits, because, obviously they have a song called Halloween, but, like, it just fits that vibe. But the band, I actually think Danzig did a better job of capturing what is creepy and eerie about Halloween is the band he did after the Misfits, which is Sam Hain, a.k.a. Sal Wynn.
He one-upped himself for sure.
I mean, obviously it's more like Sam Hain is more death rock and like metal and all that kind of stuff, but it's like I think it's the best band he's been in. One thing, and I actually had to ask my wife about this because she's more in tune to pagan and Celtic terminology, is how the fuck do you actually say it? I bring this up because like there's another band that has a name that's equally as confusing. So the correct way to pronounce Sam Hain is actually Sal Wynn. I don't know if Sam Hain was always actually Sal Wynn, but there's a live recording of Sam Hain, and Danzig's like, we're fucking Sam Hain kind of thing.
I always thought that it was the kind of thing where the fans mispronounced it so much that eventually the band was just like, fuck it, I guess we are Sam Hain. We're done.
I mean, I think there's actually credence to that because, like, if you listen to November Coming Fire, which I think is the third and final Sam Hain record, the title track, November Coming Fire, there's a chorus in there where like the chorus is like sour wind, so he obviously knows what the word is and how to correctly say it. But I think you're right. I think it might have been fans. But I was really curious about this because there's another famous metal kind of gothy band called Celtic Frost. But I've heard people pronounce it Celtic Frost, like the Boston Celtics. So then you get visions of Larry Bird and Guy Liner fronting a fucking metal band. And I was like, there's no way that this band is Celtic Frost. But technically, unlike Samhain, which is the only correct pronunciation of it, it can be Celtic Frost or it could be Celtic Frost. And to add to the ever-loving fucking confusion about this, Tom G. Warrior has said it, the frontman of Celtic Frost or Celtic Frost, depending on what your preference is, he said it both ways. So it's even more confusing. The thing about Samhain and Samhain, it's like, there's even movies in, the Halloween franchise, for example. In Halloween Part 2, Michael Myers writes Samhain on a chalkboard, but Donald Pleasance, who's British and you would think would know better, says Samhain, Day of the Dead. But then you watch Halloween 3, where Cochran, who's played by Dan O'Hurley, who's Irish, says Samhain. So it just kind of adds to this whole vagueness. But if you want to keep it real pronunciation is Samhain, not Samhain. But if you're talking about Celtic Frost, it could be Celtic Frost or it could be Celtic Frost. It's the same. Although I can't imagine fucking, again, because growing up in the 80s, when I think Celtic, I think fucking basketball. When I think Celtic, I think...
But what is the Celtic?
I mean, it's the same as a Celt. It's just how you pronounce it. I think technically probably Celtic is more correct than Celtic, but who the fuck knows at this point? So we talked a little bit about the Misfits before, but I thought it'd be fun to talk about. There was 2 years in a row that you and I went to see shows on Halloween. And one of these I've actually talked about before on Screen Drafts when I did the Punksploitation episode with Jonah Ray. And I should talk about it with you since you were actually there. We saw the Misfits in 1996.
We did with Sardonica and did Prima also
Prima.
play? Yeah.
Which was like an emo band.
They were like a Krishna, kind of Krishna core thing that was Equal Vision Records, kind of similar to Shelter.
It was I remember when they opened for the Misfits and people were heckling like, "Get off the fucking stage, Weezer."
Yeah, for sure. They were not like, but I feel like I also saw them with like AFI and VOD and some of those types of bands like at that same venue in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
After that, and I think that they were a little better received.
Yeah, I mean,
when I saw, but they were not well liked with the when you go to see Slayer, people are probably just going to make fun of the opening band. When you go see the Misfits, if you're not the Misfits, you're getting fucking heckled.
I mean, yeah, that's for sure. And like that was a weird opener. Like you would think they would be more on the nose and get like one of the, even though it was like mid-90s, I know there was countless fucking Misfits rip-off bands. I mean,
which is also worth mentioning that this was not the Misfits.
No.
This is just Jerry Only and Doyle with a different drummer, a different singer.
We went up to Philadelphia at the Trocadero, which no longer exists. The last show I saw the Trocadero.
Damn, R.I.P. I saw a lot of shows there.
Yeah, the last one I saw there before I moved out here was Dinosaur Jr.
And I think I saw all the last time I was there.
But, yeah, so we went up there to see the Misfits. The other thing I remember that show is the amount of fucking Nazis there.
It was the 90s. They were abundant.
And, like, the fucking half the venue might have been fucking neo-Nazis. And, like, I've been to punk shows where, like, Nazis or pseudo-Nazis showed up and, like, try to start shit and they get kicked out of the show. There was no kicking out these motherfuckers. Like, it was half the room was probably, like, fucking Nazis. And I remember there was a kid in a beanie who was wearing a Bad Religion shirt. He's like, "Fuck you, Nazi." And, like, this fucking skinhead Nazi rolled up to the dude, fucking headbutted him in the face and broke his nose right in front of us. He's like, "Is anyone going to stand up to the Nazis with me?" I'm like, dude, I'm fucking 16. That dude just broke your nose with his fucking forehead. It's like, I don't like Nazis, but, like, I also am not trying to get hurt. So I'm pretty sure I lied to my parents to go to this fucking show anyway. So last thing
crossing state lines and shit.
It's funny because we saw the Misfits in 1996, and then a year later it's almost the polar opposite. It's not even really a Halloween themed thing, but it was all Halloween saw. We drove up to New Jersey. It was you, me, Mike Thompson,
Jason Culler.
We went to go see Biohazard, 25 to Life, E-Town Concrete. I think some other people played, but I can't remember.
No, I think it was just those three bands.
No, there's another band that played after E-Town that I can't remember.
What? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm almost bummed to not remember that. But I remember this as just like the perfect 3-band bill. I mean, dude, can't get any more perfect than that. But E-Town Concrete, like obviously that's why the four of us went.
Oh yeah.
Like that was like our favorite band at the time.
So we basically drove up to see E-Town Concrete, and 25 to Life, which was a big hardcore band, which, you know...
Now legendary.
Now legendary. Now also a fucking joke in a way because of their singer, Rick the Life.
But the fact that they've even been able to be memed into 2020 is pretty incredible, really, if you think about it, because their demo was good.
I mean, Rick the Life still probably drives around in a giant van, like, with bootleg Negative Approach shirts. Like, long sleeve, like, triple XL, like... I mean, I know we're getting off topic here, but, like, Rick the Life opened, like, the most ridiculous fucking distro I've ever seen.
He's the bootleg king.
He's the bootleg king, like... And it's just, like, you bootleg, like, shirts by good bands, and then, like, they're in sizes that no fucking human can wear. It's, like, small, big, and tall, which is, like, not even the size. But somehow he fucking prints them up. But... The takeaway, so we drove to New Jersey to see this very non-Halloween show, but, like, E-Town played.
Asbury Park, New Jersey.
Yeah. And then 25 to Life played, and, like, if you're...
Stone Pony.
If you're familiar with, like, hardcore bands in the 90s, the primary mode of dancing was, like, floor punching and doing kung fu.
It looks like fighting.
It looks like fighting. And if you're caught in the middle of it, and you don't want any part of it, you're, like... It's basically like a kung fu fight with like 40 dudes like showing off their martial arts skills, except none of them are actually skilled. It's just fucking dudes like throwing punches and kicks. So during 25 Life, we're standing in the middle, and two of those like kung fu pits break out, or hardcore dancing pits, whatever you want to call it. And all of a sudden they fucking converge, and it was just like swinging fucking fists and legs, and people wearing fucking like Adidas pants and Jinkos or whatever the fuck they wore. Basketball jerseys, whatever you wore in like 90s New Jersey hardcore show.
All you can hear is the band playing in baggy fabric.
And it was pretty much the same when Biohazard played. And you know, I remember E-Town. I remember thinking we were going to nearly fucking die during 25 to Life. I think Biohazard might have been a little more subdued for whatever reason. But I remember we were leaving, and like all of a sudden there was a knock. I think Jason Culler had drove, and there was a knock on his window as like these two cops that were like going to give us a spotty checkpoint, and like all of us were like under 21, and none of us had been drinking at that point.
We're all under 21, and probably all four of us straight edge at that point.
And then probably a week later we broke edge, and it was like,
yeah,
didn't matter. But like, yeah, I'm pretty sure we were straight edge at that time when we were up there.
Jesus.
Oh man. So yeah, we saw the Misfits, and then we saw E-Town Concrete on Halloween. So
I'm ready to do an E-Town Concrete cover band for Halloween anytime, dude. I know the riffs. I know all the words. Fuck it.
Are you gonna?
I will rap. But only for E-Town Concrete.
Oh man, I don't know. So if you want to join an E-Town Concrete cover band, or if you want another band we talked about doing a cover set of for a few years now, is doing a Sam Hain, Sal Wynn cover band.
Right on.
Because any dickhead can do a Misfits cover band and like pull their hair. Especially now, since most people haven't had haircuts. I'm sure like a lot of people get some sick devil locks going. But anyone can have a sick devil lock and do a Misfits cover. But can you do a fucking Sam Hain, Sal Wynn cover? Let Nick and I know. So Nick will split duties. He'll do a E-Town cover band, and we'll also do the Sam Hain one. But anyway, that wraps up this episode of the Cinematic Void Podcast. We'll be back shortly with part 3, where we're going to talk about TV terror. You know, TV specials, TV movies, all set on Halloween. Make sure you've checked out the previous episode where we talk about, like, Halloween, Halloween 3, and that kind of stuff. And, you know, we also got a ton of Cinemadness movies coming up in October. And by a ton, I mean 2. There's one on October 16th, presented by Massacre Video. And then on the 30th is a triple feature, which is going to be the Cinematic Void Up All Night Cinemadness Halloween special. So mark your calendars for that. Until next time, see you in the void. Say the word, rescue me. And saxophone.
That's right, dude. All the fucking Saturday Night Live saxophone.
Yeah, alright.